At 24, orphaned twice over, Clara Deer stepped off the eastbound stage with $4 folded in her glove, an empty brass locket she had worn since before she could remember, and not one soul in the whole world waiting to say her name. That same gray morning, the county auctioned off a dead smelter canyon nobody wanted. 10 piles of rock, the auctioneer called them. 10 cold stone kilns rotting in a gulch where the silver had run out 20 years before, and Clara spent 3 of her $4 to buy them while the gallery laughed at her back. What her own father had bricked into that 10th kiln, the one that was sealed shut and never once fired, would one day give a whole valley back the faces of its dead. And it would answer, at last, the question she had carried her whole life without ever daring to ask aloud: why the locket she wore had always been empty. Before we go on, take a moment to subscribe and tell us in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. The town was called Bell Hollow, and it did not want her. She had come back as the poor come back to any place, because she had run out of anywhere else to go. Her mother had died the week Clara was born, so the girl had grown up with no face to grieve, only a locket, and the locket had nothing inside it. Her father, Elias Deer, had died 2 winters past out here in the canyon, while she was 3 states east scrubbing other women's floors and pressing other women's collars. By the time the letter reached her, the ground had already closed over him. She had not been there. She had not even known he was sick. That was the wound she carried up the plank steps of the land office, and it did not show, and no one asked. The clerk behind the counter looked at her as a shopkeeper looks at a coin he suspects is bad. He told her the estate had been eaten by back taxes and lawyers' fees, that there was nothing left of Elias Deer but debt and a name folks in the hollow said quietly if they said it at all. Then he told her about the auction, almost as a joke, because he could see she had nothing and he thought it might move her along faster. There's a lot going under the hammer this morning nobody will touch, he said. The old charcoal works up Ash Fork. 10 kilns in the ground they sit on, back taxes come to $3 even. You want to throw your money away, throw it there. She should have kept walking. Any sensible person would have. But when he said the word kilns, something turned in her that she could not have named, some pull older than sense, and she went to the auction shed instead of the depot, and she stood at the very back where the light did not reach, and she waited. The auctioneer worked through the good lots first: a wagon, a milk cow, a widow's parlor stove. And the men in the front rows bid and grumbled and spat. Then he came to the last lot on his card, and his voice changed, went easy and mocking, because everyone in the shed already knew this one was a joke. Now here's a prize, he said, and he grinned so the whole room would grin with him. The Ash Fork Charcoal Kilns. 10 fine stone beehives up a box canyon that hasn't paid a nickel since the smelter went cold. Barren rock and back guano, gentlemen, nothing up there but dead ovens and the wind. Back taxes, $3. Do I hear 3? Nobody said a word. Somebody in the second row laughed. The auctioneer let the silence hang, enjoying it, and he lifted his gavel to knock the lot back onto the county's books. $3, Clara said, from the dark at the back. Every head in the shed turned. She felt the heat crawl up her neck, but she did not lower her eyes, and she said it again, louder, so there could be no mistake. $3. I'll take them. The laughter came then, real laughter, the kind that is meant to be heard by the one it lands on. A woman buying rock, an orphan spending her last on a gulch full of dead ovens. The auctioneer laughed hardest of all, and he brought the gavel down, and he told her to see the clerk about the deed, and the whole shed was still chuckling when she walked out into the cold. She handed over 3 of her $4. The clerk gave her a folded paper and a key she could not yet see she would ever need. An old iron key on a loop of wire, and he told her the tender's cabin key was long lost, but the Kilns had no doors to lock anyway. She had $1 left, a deed to a canyon of dead ovens, and a locket with nothing in it. And for the first time since the letter had reached her out east, Clara Deer felt something that was almost not despair, because the Kilns had been her father's. She was sure of it now, sure as you are sure of a thing your body remembers before your mind can. Elias Deer had tended those ovens, and she was going home to them. Stay with me, because what waited for her up that canyon was not what any soul in Bell Hollow believed was there, and if you're finding comfort in this story, take a second to subscribe so you don't miss where it goes. Ash Fork Canyon lay 4 miles above town, up a wagon road that had not felt a wheel in years. Clara walked it with her single carpet bag and her $1, and the canyon closed around her as she climbed, red rock rising on both sides until the sky was only a bright ribbon overhead. Then the road bent, and she stopped, and she stood looking at what she owned. They stood in a long row against the western wall, 10 of them, and they were far bigger than she had let herself imagine. Not ovens, cathedrals of stone. Each kiln was a beehive of dry laid rock a full 20 feet high, round as a grain silo, with a great arched mouth at the bottom black as a cave and a smaller vent hole at the peak. They caught the low sun and burned amber against the cliff, and their shadows fell long and blue across the canyon floor. And for a moment Clara forgot she was cold and poor and alone, and simply stood with her mouth open like a child. Then the wind moved, and a bat came stuttering out of the nearest vent, and the spell broke, and she saw the truth of the place. The tender's cabin at the end of the row had lost its roof. Only 3 walls stood, and snow lay drifted in the corner where a bed had been. The kiln mouths breathed old cold air that smelled of char and mineral and something sour underneath. Weeds had grown up through the burned floors. This was no home. This was the ruin of one. A wave of bitter disappointment moved through her, so heavy she had to sit down on a fallen beam. This was it. This was what she had spent $3 on and walked 4 miles to reach. 10 cold ovens and a roofless shack and the wind. She sat there while the sun slid down the cliff and the cold came on, and she nearly wept, and then she did not, because weeping had never once fed her or warmed her, and she had learned that lesson at 7 years old, scrubbing a boarding-house landing. Instead, she made herself think. The cabin was open to the sky, but the kilns were not. Stone that thick would hold a fire's heat for hours. If she could find dry wood and something to burn it in, she could winter in one of these arches and not freeze. She would stay one night. She would decide the rest in the morning, when a body could think. She chose the 9th kiln, second from the end, because its floor was driest and its mouth faced away from the wind. She gathered deadfall from the canyon slope until her arms ached, and inside the great stone dome she built a small fire on the old burned floor, and she fed it careful and slow. The smoke drew up and out the peak vent as if the kiln had been made for exactly this, which of course it had. And the stone did what she had hoped. It took the heat and held it and gave it back, so that within an hour the whole domed space had gone from a cave to something almost like a room, and Clara sat with her back to the warm, curved wall and ate the last of her bread and felt, against all reason, that she had come to the right place. That was the first night. She has said since that she slept better in that stone beehive, with the fire ticking down and the bats muttering in the vent overhead, than she had slept in any bed in 3 states. In the morning she began to look around, and that is when the Kenyon started telling her things. She walked to the row of kilns in the gray dawn with her breath smoking, and she counted them. And she studied each in turn, and something snagged at the edge of her attention before her mind could say what it was. It was only when she reached the far end that she understood. 9 of the 10 kilns were black. Coal black, tar black, 20 years of charcoal smoke baked into the very stone, the arches sodded so deep the rock had gone the color of a stove lid. 9 of them had been fired again and again until they wore their work like a miner wears the dust. But the 10th kiln, the one at the very end nearest the ruined cabin, was pale. Its stone was the raw dun of the canyon wall, clean as the day it was laid. No soot, no char, no smoke stain climbing from its vent. Somebody had built a charcoal kiln and never once lit a fire in it. And its mouth was bricked shut, where the other 9 gaped open, black and empty. The 10th had been walled up with courses of fired brick, fitted and mortared into the stone arch with a care that stopped her breath. This was not a rockfall. This was not a lazy man stacking stone to keep out the weather. Every brick sat true. The mortar had been struck smooth and luted at the joints with river mud, as a mason seals a kiln shut for a long, slow burn, except no burn had ever come. Someone had sealed this oven tight as a tomb and then walked away and left it cold. Clara stood in front of that pale bricked arch a long time. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, that a kiln got walled up for 100 dull reasons, that she was cold and hungry and looking for meaning where there was only rock. But she did not believe herself, and she has said since that she already knew, standing there in the dawn, that this was why she had come. She did not yet have the words for it. She only had the knowing. Then she looked up, and she saw the mark. It was cut into the keystone of the arch, just above the topmost course of brick, small and shallow. Easy to miss, unless the low sun struck it sideways as it was striking it now. A little chiseled figure no bigger than a thumbnail. A crescent, and inside the crescent a single 5-pointed star. Simple as a child's drawing, and cut by a patient hand. Clara's own hand went to her throat without her telling it to. To the locket. She had worn it since she was small. Her father had put it around her neck himself, the one clear memory she had of him from before she was sent away, his big hands fumbling at the tiny clasp. She had opened it 10,000 times, hoping for a face, and finding only bare brass. But she had never much studied the outside of it, the little worn thing being empty, and therefore, she had always thought. Meaningless, she unclasped it now with fingers that would not hold still, and she turned the locket over in the flat of her palm, and she held it up so the same low sun caught it. Cut into the back of the case, worn nearly smooth by decades against her skin, was a crescent moon with a single star inside it, the same mark. The mark over the sealed door and the mark on the empty locket were one and the same. She did not understand it. She would not understand it for weeks, but she understood this much. Her father had cut that sign into that stone, and her father had cut that sign into the brass at her throat. And the two of them together had waited 20 years in a dead canyon for someone to come and put them side by side. And she was the one who had come. We'll get to what was behind that wall, but not yet, because the meaning of it was buried deeper than the bricks. And if you want to be here when Clara finds it, this is the moment to subscribe. She could have torn the wall down that first hour. She did not. Some instinct she did not examine told her the 10th kiln had been sealed slowly and ought to be opened slowly. And besides, a body has to eat. So Clara did the thing that would remake her whole life in the doing. She stayed. She fixed the tender's cabin roof with cedar shakes she split herself. She sold her one remaining dollar's worth of labor to a rancher down the valley and bought flour and salt pork and a little coffee. She learned the canyon, where the spring was, where the deadfall lay thickest, which kiln threw its warmth longest into the night. And every morning and every evening she stood before the pale-bricked arch and a little crescent moon, and she studied it, and she waited to feel ready. It was the boy who told her the first true thing. His name was Tobias, and he was maybe 11, all elbows and cowlick, and he appeared one afternoon at the head of the canyon, leading a burro loaded with 2 sacks of pinon wood, as calm as if he delivered to dead smelter canyons every day of the week. Firewood, he said, when Clara came out to meet him, for the kilns. She stared at him. "There's no one up here to buy firewood, son. There's only me, and I've got no money for it." "Ain't for sale," the boy said. "It's paid up. Old man Deer paid me ma to keep dry wood laid by, so the ovens wouldn't take damp. She sends it up every month. Been doing it since I was little." He looked at the row of black kilns and the pale one at the end, and he frowned at Clara in the plain way of children. "You living in his cabin?" "He was my father," Clara said, and her voice did something on the word father that made the boy go quiet and respectful, as even children go quiet around a fresh grief. "He was good to my ma," Tobias said after a while. "When my pa passed, we'd have gone under. Mr. Deer paid her honest for the wood, even them years he never fired a single kiln." He shrugged. Whole town thought he was cracked. Buying up dead ovens, paying folks to keep a cold canyon stocked. My ma never thought so. She said he was keeping something safe. "Keeping what safe?" Clara asked, and she heard the hunger in her own voice and could not help it. But the boy only shrugged again and would not meet her eye, and she understood he was telling her the edge of a thing he did not himself possess, and she let him be. She traded him a hot meal for the wood, and he ate it fast as growing boys do, and before he left he stopped at the pale kiln and touched the smooth-struck mortar with one finger. "He sealed this one up the winter I was born," Tobias said. "I remember on account of Ma was heavy with me and couldn't carry, so he hauled every brick himself. Took him near a month. Wouldn't let a soul help, not for money nor kindness." The boy looked at her sideways. Folks thought he'd buried gold in there, from the smelter days. There was men came up to dig it out one summer, but Mr. Deer sat in the mouth of it with a rifle across his knees 3 nights running, and they gave it up. He wiped his mouth. "Weren't no gold, though. My ma says whatever's in there, it wasn't worth a red cent to anybody but him." Then he took his burro and went, and Clara stood alone with a full belly and an emptier feeling than before, because the boy had told her everything and nothing. Her father had sealed the 10th kiln the winter Tobias was born, 11 years past. He had done it alone, by hand, over a month. He had guarded it with a rifle, and whatever lay behind the brick was, by every account in the valley, worth nothing at all. She thought of the locket, empty, worthless, and worn against her heart for 24 years. Worth nothing, she thought, to anybody but him. That night she did not sleep. She sat in the 9th kiln with the fire going, and she turned it over and over. And near dawn she made up her mind. Some things a person has to open with their own hands, gold or no gold, sense or no sense. In the morning she found a cold chisel and a hammer in the wreck of the tender's shed, tools her father had left, tools that fit her hand as if they had been waiting for it. And she went to the 10th kiln, and she chose a single brick low on the left side of the arch. And she set the chisel to the mortar joint. It took her the better part of the morning to work that one brick free. Her father had luted the joints with river mud over the mortar, patient as a monk, and the whole wall had cured for 11 years into something near as hard as the stone around it. She chipped and pried and rested and chipped again, and her hands blistered and bled a little. And still she worked, because she had come too far to stop at one brick. And at last it shifted. It grated, and with a sound like a long breath let out, the brick slid free into her hands, and from the black slot it left came a draught of air against her face. She had expected the cold. What she had not expected was how dry it was, and how utterly dark. She had opened cellars before, root cellars in cold rooms, and they all breathed damp, a wet mineral stink of earth and rot. This breathed nothing of the kind. The air that came out of that sealed arch was dry as August dust and cold as a spring house, and it smelled faintly of something sharp and clean she could not place, something almost like camphor, almost like the inside of a doctor's bag. It was the air of a place built with terrible care to keep something out, not water, not thieves. Light, this kiln had been made to keep out light. Clara put her eye to the slot and saw nothing but black. She fetched her lamp and lit it and held the flame close, and she peered in, and slowly, as her eye adjusted, shapes came up out of the black. Not a jumble of stone, not the caved-in ruin she half expected. Shelves, wooden shelves, tier upon tier of them, built up the inside curve of the dome like the scaffolding of a mine, running clear to the vent at the peak, and on the shelves, packed close and even, row upon row of straw-wrapped bundles, hundreds of them, each one about the size of a large book. She stayed at that slot a long while, her breath held, her lamp trembling. Then she set to work on the second brick, and the third, and she did not stop, not for water, not for the ache in her back, until she had opened a gap in the wall wide enough for a grown woman to climb through. Whatever her father had spent a month of his life sealing away, Clara dear was going in after it. And what she found on those shelves would take a dead valley and hand it back its own faces. But the deepest thing waiting in that dark, the thing meant only for her, she would not touch until the very end. Subscribe now, because the next thing she lifted down off that shelf is where this stops being a story about 10 piles of rock. She went in with the lamp held high. Inside, the sealed kiln was a perfect stone beehive, and the shelves her father had built filled it nearly to the peak, tier above tier, all of them heavy with the straw bundles. The dry cold sat on her skin. Dust hung in the lamplight, but it was clean dust, mineral dust, not the dust of decay. Clara reached up and took down the nearest bundle, and it was heavier than it looked, and she bore it to the broken gap where the daylight came through, and she knelt on the burned floor and unwound the straw with careful fingers. Inside the straw was a sheet of glass. It was about the size of a window pane in a good house, but thicker, and one face of it was coated in a skin of something dark, a dried gray-black emulsion gone the color of a storm cloud. She turned it toward the light, and at first she saw nothing but murk. Then the angle changed, and the light struck through, and Clara made a small sound and nearly dropped it. There was a face in the glass. A man's face, but wrong. His skin dark where skin should be pale, his black coat gone ghostly white, his eyes two pale coins. Everything backward, light for dark and dark for light, the world turned inside out and frozen. He sat very straight in a photographer's chair, with his hat on his knee and his mouth set stern, as men set their mouths when a picture is being made, because a picture, in those days, was a thing that might outlast you. Behind him a painted backdrop of columns and drapery. Below the chair, the fringe of a rug. And though the face was reversed and strange, it was a real face, a particular man, someone who had once sat down in front of a camera and held still and hoped to be remembered. Clara knew, then, what she was holding. She had seen a glass negative once, in a photographer's window back east, the plate held up to the light before it was printed. This was that. Every straw bundle on every shelf in this kiln was a photographic plate, hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Her father had walled up a cold stone oven and filled it, from floor to peak, with faces. She went back in. She could not have stopped herself. She brought down bundle after bundle and unwrapped them one by one on the burned floor until the daylight failed and she had to work by the lamp, and the ghost faces looked up at her from the glass, reversed and silver and still. A young couple standing stiff and proud, the bride's hand set just so on the groom's arm. A whole family ranged on the steps of a sod house, 9 of them. The littlest a blur, because a baby will not hold still even to be remembered. 3 young men in soldiers' coats, with their arms across each other's shoulders, grinning, going off somewhere from which the glass could not say whether they had come back. An old woman alone in a black dress with her wedding ring turned to the camera on purpose. A baby in a christening gown. A man in his coffin, hands folded. The hard last picture that families made in those years so they would have something, anything, to keep. Weddings and funerals and soldiers and babies. The whole turning of a valley's life, its comings in and its goings out, caught on glass and packed in straw and hidden in the dark. And at the back of the deepest shelf, wrapped separate in oilcloth, she found the rest of it, a folding wooden camera on a tripod, its bellows cracked but whole, a wooden case of glass stoppered bottles, their contents long dried, their paper labels reading collodion and silver nitrate and varnish in a faded copperplate hand, shallow enameled trays, and a ledger book bound in cracked black leather. Clara opened the ledger on her knees by lamplight, and here the ghost work became something she could read. Page after page in a neat sloping hand, not her father's hand, she saw at once. A stranger's hand, and each line an accounting not of money but of people, a date, a place, a name, sometimes 2 names, or a whole family of them, Bell Hollow, Ash Fork, Cottonwood, the Pruitt wedding, the Hendry child laid out, Old Man Salter and his sons the year of the flood, line after line, year after year, a stranger going up and down the valley with a camera on a mule, making pictures of every soul who would sit for one and writing each of them down. On the ledger's first page, in the same sloping hand, a name and a note. Ambrose Teal, itinerant photographist, and under it, these plates are the property of the persons pictured, held in trust. Held in trust. Clara read that line 3 times. A photographer named Ambrose Teal had spent his life making the valley's pictures, and he had thought of the plates not as his own, but as belonging to the people in them, held in trust against the day they might want them. And then somehow the whole trust had ended up walled into a cold kiln by a charcoal tender named Elias Deer. She sat back against the stone with the ledger in her lap and the ghost faces all around her in the lamplight, and she felt the size of the thing settle onto her at last. This was no gold. The boy's mother had been right. It was worth not a red cent to a soul in Bell Hollow. And it was also the single most precious thing in the whole valley, and nobody living even knew it was here. Somehow she already understood, sitting there, that her father had not hidden treasure. He had hidden memory. He had walled up the faces of the valley's dead so that the light could never reach in and burn them away. And she did not yet know why, or why the mark over the door matched the mark on her empty locket, but she knew she had been right to come. And she wept then, at last. Not from grief, but from something that had no name she could find. Alone in a beehive of stone, with 2,000 strangers looking up at her out of the silvered gloom. If your own people are somewhere in a box in an attic, waiting, keep that thought a moment, and if this story is reaching you, take a breath and subscribe. Because now, someone else is coming up the canyon, and he does not come to remember anyone. He came on the third week, in a spring wagon behind a good bay horse, a heavy-set man in a town coat with a leather case on the seat beside him, and Clara saw the dust of him from a mile down the canyon, and something in her went cold before she could reason why. She had printed a few of the plates by then. She had rigged a shallow frame and coaxed sun through the negative onto paper coated by a recipe she had puzzled out of Ambrose Teal's own bottles and notes, and she had 4 finished pitches pinned up, drying in the mended cabin, a bride, a baby, 2 soldiers, and a sight of those first true faces rising slowly onto the paper had been the nearest thing to joy she had felt in years. The man in the wagon put an end to that joy the moment he climbed down. "You'd be the woman that bought the Kilns," he said. He did not give his name at first. He looked past her at the row of stone beehives with a merchant's flat appraising eye, as a man looks at goods. "Renfrew, I represent the salvage interest holding paper on the Teal estate. I've come for the glass." "There's no glass here for sale," Clara said. "There's a kiln full of it," Renfrew said, and he smiled without any warmth at all. "Window glass, plate glass, 2,000 good panes, stacked and packed and waiting, and I mean to have every sheet." He drew a folded document from his leather case and held it up, but did not hand it over. "I've a writ. The Teal photographic estate went to the bank when the old man died with debts owing. And the bank's paper says the glass negatives were forfeit to be sold for salvage. There's a greenhouse concern down in the flats will take the lot by the crate. They scrape the picture off, you understand. Boil the silverback for what little it's worth, sand the plate clean, and set it into hotbeds and cold frames. Glass is glass. Misses. A pain's a pain whether there's a dead man's face on it or not. Clara felt the canyon tilt under her. She understood, all at once, the whole shape of it. This was the fate the plates had escaped. Once. This was the thing her father had walled them away from. Ambrose Teal had died owing money. The bank had moved to sell his life's work as raw glass to a man who grew cucumbers under it. And somehow Elias Deer had gotten there first, had gotten the plates up this canyon and sealed them in the one place on earth no daylight could ever reach them. And now, 20 years on, the bank's paper had found its way into the hands of this flat-eyed man in a town coat, and he had come to finish the job. "You'll not have them," Clara said. Her voice shook, and she hated that it shook. They belonged to the people in them. It's written so in the man's own book, held in trust. Renfrew laughed, a short, unpleasant bark. Trust don't pay a banknote, Mrs. Paper does, and my paper says the estate's chattels are mine to sell. He took a step toward the sealed kiln, and Clara stepped in front of him, and he stopped, more surprised than afraid. You'd stand in front of a lawful writ? Over old glass? There's men in town told me the tender who hid this was cracked in the head, and I begin to see it's a family trait. Do you know whose faces are on that glass? Clara said. There's a woman in there died in childbed. There's 3 boys went off to a war, and only 1 came home. There's a baby laid out in its christening gown because that plate was the only picture its mother would ever have of it. You mean to boil them for the silver and grow cucumbers under what's left. I mean to sell them for what they weigh, Renfrew said, and he did not blink. A picture's got no price once the man that sat for it is in the ground. Sentiment don't render down, Mrs. Silver does. They are not yours to render, she said. The bank says otherwise, and the bank holds the note. He tapped the folded writ against his palm, patient as a man who has done this many times and always won. You've a choice, and only the one. Stand aside and let me crate them out civil, and I'll leave you the kilns to freeze in. Or stand in my road, and I'll come back up this canyon with the sheriff and a wagon, and the glass goes just the same, and you go with the sheriff. There's no third door. I've bought out sadder cases than yours, and I'll buy out this one. Show me the writ, Clara said. Something in how she said it made him hand it over. Perhaps he wanted to watch a poor woman quail at the sight of the law. She unfolded the document and made herself read it slowly, every line, though her hands wanted to tear it in two. And it was as she reached the bottom of the second page, where the dates and the signatures crowded together in the small print no one is meant to read, that Clara dear went very still. She read it again. Then she looked up at Renfrew. And for the first time since he had climbed down from his wagon, she was not afraid. But before she said a single word, she folded the writ back along its creases and handed it to him, and asked him, mild as milk, to wait one moment while she fetched something from the cabin. Stay with me, because what she carried back out under the canyon sky undid this man with his own paper. Subscribe now, so you hear when it does. Inside the cabin, Clara went not to the drying pictures, but to the oilcloth bundle she had carried out of the deepest shelf, the one she had opened only once and then wrapped up again, because the sight of what lay beneath it had frightened her with its plainness. She had told no one, not even the boy. Under the folded ledger at the very bottom of that sealed shelf, her father had left a flat parcel and a packet of papers, and among the papers was one she had read a dozen times and could not yet bear to understand. She took only the papers now. The parcel she left where it lay. Some things still had to wait. She came back out into the light with Elias Deer's papers in her hand, and she spread them on the tailgate of Renfrew's own wagon. And she made him look. Your writ, she said, is dated the 14th of that autumn. The bank moved to sell the Teal estate for salvage on the 14th. But here, and she laid her father's paper flat, a bill of sale in a country lawyer's hand, stamped and witnessed and true, here is a lawful purchase, dated the 11th, 3 days before your bank ever raised its hand. My father bought the Teal photographic plates, outright and entire, from the widow Teal, who held them free and clear before any debt was called, for the sum of $80, which was every dollar he had in the world, witnessed by the county clerk, recorded and stamped. The plates were never the bank's to forfeit, Mr. Renfrew, because 3 days before your paper was worth the ink on it. They were already his. And now she folded the bill of sale and held it against her. They are mine. Renfrew's face went through several colors. He snatched up his own writ and read the dates for himself, the 14th against the 11th, and Clara watched the whole rotten scheme collapse behind his eyes. His paper was good. Hers was 3 days older and good, and older paper wins. He had come up a dead canyon to strip 2,000 faces off their glass, and he had been beaten to it 20 years before by a poor man who had spent his last $80 to make sure no one ever could. This won't stand, Renfrew said, but the bluster had gone out of him, and he knew it. The bank, there's lawyers. Take it to any lawyer you like, Clara said. Take it to the county recorder, who stamped my father's bill with his own hand. You'll find the same date I read you. The 11th. She held his eye. Now get down out of my canyon. And he did. He climbed onto his good bay horse and turned his wagon in the narrow canyon and went back down along the road he had come, and the last Bell Hollow ever heard of the salvage interest holding paper on the Teal estate was the sound of that spring wagon rattling down the wash. The greenhouse concern in the flats got its glass from somewhere else. Not one face was ever scraped off, not one plate. The trust held. It held because a charcoal tender everyone thought was cracked had gotten there first with everything he owned, and because his daughter had learned to read the small print at the bottom of the page. She stood in the canyon a long time after the dust settled, and then she went back inside, and she sat down among the ghost faces on the cold, burned floor. And she looked at the oilcloth parcel she had left wrapped at the bottom, and she knew the waiting was over. But before we open it, and it is nearly time, know that everything the story has held back has been holding back for this. Subscribe now and stay to the end, because the last thing Elias Deer left in the dark was not for the valley at all. It was for her. The parcel was wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a strip of the same wire her father had looped the deed key on, and Clara's hands knew the knot before her eyes did. Inside the oilcloth was a wooden slide case such as photographers use to carry a single plate, and folded around it a letter. The letter was in her father's hand. She had known it would be. She had known since the morning she matched the little sign on her locket to the sign cut into the door that this was what she had climbed the canyon to find, and she had made herself wait. And now she did not have to wait any more. She sat with her back against the warm stone near the mouth where the light was good, and she read. My Clara, it began. If you are reading this, then you came, and you found the door, and you knew the mark. Which means you are grown, and I am gone, and the both of those things grieve me more than I have words for. You will want to know why. I will tell it plain, the way I never could when you were small, and I had no way to keep you. Your mother's name was Ada, and she died the week you were born, and there is not one photograph of her in all the world but one. In those days a picture cost dear, and we were poor as church mice, and we always said next spring, when the money's easier. Next spring never came for her. But the winter you were carried, Ambrose Teal came through the valley with his camera on his mule. And he was a kind man, and he owed me a turn for wood I'd given him, and he made your mother's picture for nothing. She was heavy with you, and would not sit at first, being vain about her shape, and I told her, never mind the shape, I want your face to keep. So she sat, and 9 days after you were born, she was gone, and that one plate was all I had left of her face in this world. I put it in your locket, meant to. I had the little print made, and I took it to the jeweler, and I meant to set it in the locket I'd give you when you were grown. But I could not do it. Do you know why, Clara? Because a printed picture fades. Sun takes it. 10 years, 20, and it goes to a brown ghost, and then to nothing. And I could not bear that the only face your mother had left would fade off your neck a little more each day you wore her. A paper picture is a candle. It burns down. But the glass the light made her on, if you keep it in the dark, it does not fade. It waits. It can wait 100 years. So I gave you the empty locket, and I kept the reason from you. And I am sorry for the weight of an empty thing against a child's heart. But I could not give you a mother who would fade. I gave you a mother who would wait. And then the bank came for Ambrose Teal's plates to boil off the silver and sell the glass for hotbeds, and your mother's face was in that kiln of pictures with all the rest. Every mother and father and soldier and child the valley ever had, and I could not let them scrape her off the glass to grow cucumbers under. I could not let them do it to any of them. So I spent all I had, and I bought the whole trust from the widow 3 days before the bank could move, and I brought it up the canyon on a mule 12 trips. And I built the shelves with my own hands, and I walled the 10th kiln shut so the sun could never take a single face of them. I told the town I was cracked and let them think it, because a cracked old man guarding rock draws less than a sane one guarding treasure. The crescent and star cut above that door is the same sign worn into your locket. It was your mother's own, a moon and a star, the sign she stitched on everything she made. I cut it over the door so that one day, if you came, you would know the door was meant for you. It was always meant for you, Clara. Everything in the dark behind that wall I kept for the valley. But this one plate, the one wrapped apart from all the rest, I kept for you. Look at your mother's face. Then do with all the others what I never had the courage to do while I lived, being too afraid of losing them to ever let them out of the dark. Give this valley back its dead. Let them fade if they must in the sunlight on people's walls, held in loving hands. A face that no one ever sees is only glass. Let them be seen. I am sorry I was never there. Light the lamp for me some evening after the sun is down and can do no harm, and know that I am, and always was, your father, Elias dear. Clara sat a long while with the letter in her lap and the canyon going gold outside the kiln mouth. Then she untied the wire and opened the wooden slide case, and she drew out the single plate her father had kept apart from all the rest. And she carried it to the light, and she held it up. The world came right side round in her mind as it never did with the others, because this face she needed no help to read. A young woman in a plain dark dress, seated, her hands folded over the round swell of a child not yet born, for Clara herself, 9 days from being born, and her chin was lifted a little, half proud and half shy. A woman who had not wanted to sit for her shape, and had sat anyway because her husband wanted her face to keep. Dark hair drawn back simple, a mouth that looked as though it were about to break into something. And at her throat, on a ribbon, a small brass locket, its case turned just so to the camera, so that even in the reversed silver ghost of the plate you could see, if you knew to look. The little cut sign of a moon holding a star. Her mother, Ada dear, holding her. The only photograph of either of them ever made in the world, hidden 20 years in the dark of a kiln her father sealed with his own hands so that the sun could never take her face. Clara pressed the cold glass to her chest and she wept, and this time she let herself, all the way down. For the mother she had never had a face for, and the father she had never had the chance to thank, and for the empty locket that had never once been empty of meaning, only of light. She understood it now. The locket had been empty, because the face that belonged in it had to live where light could not reach, waiting there in the pitch black for the one who came to bring it out. She was that one. She had always been that one. It had always been hers. That was the winter of it. What came after is nearly the whole of why the story is worth the telling. Clara did not sell the Kilns. She did not sell one plate. She did what her father had told her to do and had never found the courage for himself. She gave the valley back its dead. She learned the printing craft in earnest from Ambrose Teal's own bottles and notes and a great deal of ruined paper, and she rigged a proper printing frame in the mended cabin, and one plate at a time she began to bring the faces up out of the glass and into the light where hands could hold them. She started with the ledger. She matched each plate to its line, the Pruitt wedding, the Hendry child, old man Salter and his sons, and then she did a thing that Bell Hollow never forgot. She let it be known, quiet, through the boy Tobias and his mother, that the woman up Ash Fork had the old pictures. That if you had lost somebody, a wife, a father, a child, in the years the photographist came through, there might be a face of them waiting in the canyon, and she would print it for you for the cost of the paper. They did not believe it at first. Then the widow Salter walked the 4 miles up the canyon on a raw morning, not believing, leaning on a stick, and she stood in the doorway of the printing room with her chin up like a woman braced to be made a fool of. "They're saying up the valley you've got pictures of the dead," the old woman said. "I buried my husband 30 years back. There was never any picture made of him but the one the photographist took the summer before, and that one went off with the man's things when he died, and I never saw it. I've forgotten his face. 30 years, and I cannot call up my own husband's face." Her voice did not break. It had done its breaking long ago. "If you're selling false hope to old women, girl, say so now, and I'll spare us both." "What was his given name?" Clara asked. Amos Salter." Clara went to the ledger and ran her finger down the sloping lines, and she found it, and she looked up. "Sit down by the stove," she said. "It takes a little while. But he's here." The old woman sat, and she watched, and she said nothing at all while Clara worked, and when the print came up at last out of the tray, Clara carried it to her wet and dripping and put it in her 2 hands. "That's him," the widow Salter whispered. "That's my Amos. That's his very face." And she sat down slow in the dirt of the canyon floor with the photograph held against her breast and could not speak another word, and Clara knelt with her and held her. And something began that morning that did not stop for years. They came after that in a steady stream, the valley that had laughed at her. They came up the wagon road that had felt no wheel in years, and now felt them every week. They came for mothers and fathers and the babies that had not lived and the soldiers that had not come back, and Clara printed them one at a time, careful and slow, and would take nothing but the cost of the paper, and sometimes not even that. The men who had laughed loudest in the auction shed came up hats in hand for a picture of a parent they had thought lost to memory, and Clara gave it to them and never once said a word about the laughing. That was not her way, and it had not been her father's. Bell Hollow learned the tender's name again, and learned it right. Elias Deer, they said now, the man who saved the pictures. The man everyone thought was cracked, sitting in the mouth of a cold kiln with a rifle across his knees, guarding the only faces the valley had left of the people it had buried. Not cracked, the one sane man among them, who had understood before any of them that the most valuable thing a person can own is not silver, nor glass, nor gold, but the good they quietly do for someone who can never pay it back, a face kept safe in the dark for a stranger's grandchild, not yet born. Clara Deer stayed. She was the keeper of the 10th kiln after that, and she kept it the rest of her long life. She never walled it up again. There was no need, for the shelves were slowly emptying as the faces went home to the walls and the mantels and the loving hands they were made for. But she kept the dry dark of it just the same, for the plates still waiting their turn, and she built a proper little printing room onto the mended cabin. And she set her mother's plate in a frame of dark wood on the mantel where the evening light, coming low and gold and harmless up the canyon, could touch it only after the sun was down. And every evening, after the sun had gone behind the western wall and could do no more harm, Clara lit a lamp and set it in the window of the cabin, just as her father had asked. She never told a soul why. But the light of it carried down the dark canyon, one warm point against the great stone beehives, and folks on the valley road below took to watching for it, the lamp up Ash Fork, and it came to mean, without anyone ever quite deciding it should, that someone up there remembered you, that whoever you had lost, their face was safe, that the light was kept and the door was open and you were not forgotten. She wore the locket to the end of her days. And she did put a picture in it, at last, a small print of her mother's face made from that one plate, set behind the little glass where it had always been meant to go. She knew it would fade. She had made her peace with that. A face you carry against your heart is allowed to fade a little. Her father had been wrong about that one thing, because a face that is loved and touched and worn is worth more faded than any face kept perfect in a sealed dark and never seen. She had learned that from the widow Salter sitting down in the dirt. She had learned it from the whole valley coming up the canyon for their dead. Some things are meant to be kept, and some things are meant to be given, and the hardest wisdom of a life is knowing the empty locket from the full one, and knowing which faces belong in the dark and which belong in the light. Clara Deer had come up that canyon with $4 and an empty locket and no one in the world to say her name. She left it, in the fullness of her years, with a valley full of people who said it like a blessing, and a locket that was full at last, and 10 stone kilns that everyone had called worthless, and that had turned out to hold the only thing that could never be bought back once it was gone, the faces of the loved and the dead, kept safe in the dark by a poor man who spent everything he had so that his daughter and a whole valley of strangers might one day be able to look their own people in the eye again. If there is a face you have been meaning to bring up out of some dark drawer or dusty box, a picture of someone you loved that you have been keeping too carefully, too safely, for too long, take it out. Set it where the light can find it. Let it be seen, and let it be held, even if it fades. The keeping was never the point. The seeing was. That was what her father learned too late and left her to finish, and it is, in the end, the whole of what the 10th kiln had to teach. So here is the question to carry with you tonight, and I would truly like to know how you answer it in the comments below. If everything you owned came down to a locket and $4 and a row of stone nobody wanted, would you sell the worthless thing for what little it might bring and walk away lighter? Or would you climb the canyon and pry the wall and find out at last what a father spent his whole life keeping in the dark for you? Thank you for staying to the end of this one. If it moved you, subscribe and tell us where you're listening from, and we will light the lamp again for you soon.